Good evening everyone, welcome to this meeting of the Borough Plan Committee. Evacuation procedure, I won't go through the whole thing, I see no public here or anybody that doesn't know the drill, so we're not expecting an alarm. So the meeting is being live streamed however and recorded for future publication on the Council's website. Please can I ask that you all turn off your mobile phones or to silent for the duration of the meeting. Apologies. We have had some apologies. Councillor Kennar is substituted by Councillor Beetham. Councillor Walsh substituted by Councillor Pandev, who isn't here at the moment, I understand. Okay. And also Councillor Elliott and Councillor Phillips. Is there anything else? No, that's the one. So item 3, the minutes. This is to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 9th of June. Is everybody okay for me to approve those? Yes. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest that aren't included in the minute? Yes, Councillor Beetham.
Just as I am subbing for Councillor Kenner, all of my declarations can be found as it is online and those are currently correct.
Okay, thank you. Public consultation. We only have one speaker, Councillor Condacourt, on all items, so I'll take the items in the order they are on the agenda. So straight on to item 6, which is Regulation 18 responses and draft offers of responses. Ashley, are you going to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. I'll pick this up this evening. Okay, thank you, councillors. So, as members will be aware, the authority consulted on the first stage of its borough plan review in the summer. The report brings to committee the responses that the council received as part of that consultation, and then provides a draft set of officer responses, which we're effectively requesting that we take to Cabinet in due course as the final responses. One minor amendment that we would seek to make on page 34, I'll read it out so you don't need to go to the actual text, but page 34, the appendix, there's a response which currently states, the council have a duty to cooperate with nearby local authorities as set out in the National Planning Policy, and as such, MBBC are required to take on some of Coventry City Council's unmet need. At this point, that doesn't need to be as directed as that, so we're going to propose that we amend that just to say that we may need to take on some of Coventry City Council's unmet need, because at this point in time we don't know whether they will have any unmet need in the future. So we'll soften that, and if there is any other similar draft responses to that effect, we'd make those amendments. Other than that, councillors, the reports as read are set out within your papers.
Thank you, Ashley. So, public consultation. Councillor Condacourt, usual rules apply.
Thank you, Chair. It's been a more useful consultation than some of the ones we've had, and obviously we've got almost 100 responses. Really disappointed that councillors haven't responded as far as I can see. We had one from Bulkington, one from Bedworth, and I'm the only Nuneaton councillor that seems to have responded to this consultation. We also had no response from any members of the Labour Party as far as I can see, or the Labour group. As they got us where we are today, it's disappointing. I think it is well worth members reading the responses. I mean, there's about 100 pages of them, but there's a lot of useful information in there. And I'm fearful that it's wasted if we don't then go and quickly get a plan. One area I would like to talk about is infrastructure, because the CCG responds rather woolly. And the old plan is a decade late. It was a 2011 to 2031 plan. So we're now a decade into that plan, and we haven't had a single GP surgery or any provision provided. And it's that sort of thing that people really get upset about when they get development. They get all the negatives of development, and they don't get the CCG or whatever quango it is, providing the things to mitigate the damage. So I do hope these comments are read. I do hope we move forward very quickly. There's a lot of useful information from the public, some site details and some very general. And even the house builders in here are looking and talking about 495, 400 and this. They're not talking about us having 14,000. And if you read the comments from the National House Building Association, some of the developers, they see the need for a strategic long-term plan. And for, I don't think they're champing ridiculously at the bit for stupid numbers. But we have a problem because the viability is always difficult if you go for large numbers. So I do hope we take this forward quickly but carefully, as I am very disappointed with the people who haven't responded. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Condicord. Does any committee member have any questions? Councillor Beetham.
Thank you. So I'm glad to see engagement was high with 88 responses, 44 being individuals and 3 groups as well. With some of these responses going over
Sorry, Councillor Beetham, is this in response to Councillor Condicord? No?
Sorry.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So the recommendations are that the committee are asked to endorse the consideration of the responses received during the Regulation 18 consultation in the production of the next version of the Borough Plan Review. I'm happy to propose that. Can I have a seconder? Thank you. Yes, that will be subject to the amendment that Ashley talked about. Thank you. Any member? Councillor Beetham, did you want to say your piece now?
Apologies for that, Chair. As I said, I'm glad to see engagement was high with 88 responses, 44 being individuals, 3 groups, and some of the responses are over 6 pages long, which is always good in regards to responses and public consultation. My question is, how does this compare to the previous borough plan consultations in regards to numbers and words, basically?
I don't have those answers, but Ashley?
In terms of Quantum Council, we'd have to double check. In terms of the events and the coverage, it was certainly comprehensive in my opinion, and from experience of working at other authorities, I would suggest that it was a successful consultation process. I don't know if that's helpful, but we'll go back and check in terms of the quantum for you.
Any other member?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say it's very welcome, and can I actually say a thank you to you, Chair, as well. I know that the consultation events, there were a huge number of those right across our borough, far more than we've done previously, and actually, frankly, most importantly, at a time that's most suitable to our residents, rather than being, during working hours and in locations where people can't get to. But I think you were at all of them, I think, Chair, as the portfolio holder for planning. And I know that was a huge endeavour, and a huge thank you to you on behalf of residents for doing that. I think it's also very welcome to look at the fact that this consultation was, I think, far wider, far more wide-ranging than we've had in the past. And I think it's really important that as we continue to deliver upon what we promised in our manifesto, that vision, that ambition, that aspiration for our borough, that actually we continue to listen to what residents have said and what they are asking for. And I think this document, this consultation, is really key to building that evidence base and to continuing to listen to what it is local residents want. I think it's really important that we accept these, we look at them, we move on, and we try and adopt as much of this as physically as possible, and to listen to all the expertise coming not just from residents but from other outside bodies and organisations that have contributed as well. One thing I think that is key is, and I will echo some of the things that have been said earlier, is it's absolutely right and vital that residents do see that development of infrastructure alongside that of housing. Particularly, for example, in my ward that's been very heavily affected by development on a piecemeal approach prior to and since the adoption of a borough plan, where we've had to wait an awfully long time for a school to appear. We've had to wait an awfully long time and are still waiting for GP provision and other provision that was promised to residents. And I think this plan, having a reformed plan, and as this consultation as being a first step on that road, is absolutely vital. And we must ensure that not only do we deliver what was promised, but also that we hold to account organisations like the CCG, like education, to ensure that what they have said we require is also delivered. And that's why I'm really proud to have been working very hard alongside my colleague Councillor Tromans to secure Higham Lane North for residents of Weddington and St Nicholas Park, because it's absolutely vital now, with the schooling in that side of town oversubscribed, to actually be able to look at and to push forward those developments and those opportunities for the young people that we both serve. So a great start, a thank you to you, and let's continue to pick up, deliver, listen, and carry out the will of the people, which is exactly what we're all here to do, Chair. So that's my remarks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for those kind words, Councillor Walmsley. I totally agree with you. You know, we have to put our residents first and foremost in this process. They've been cheated from having a proper voice on the development of the original plan, and we made a promise. We made a promise in our election manifesto that we would include them, and we will come on to that later in a later item. But and I absolutely agree with you on the infrastructure. That school is most important. We've got a lot of houses filled now with a lot of residents, and if we can't bring forward the infrastructure to support that, there is something wrong. So hopefully we can address that as part of the process. And I will say, although I deem that the consultation was successful, we're still learning from it, and I think we can do better at the next one. So we have plans. We are looking at how it's marketed. We're looking at how we get the message out there and include as many members of the public as we can possibly get. So hopefully the next consultation, which should take place, I think in January, you'll see an even bigger improvement on that one. So thank you for the comments. Any other member?
Thank you, Chair. As it's been specifically referenced, I'd just like to update you very briefly on Top Farm and Higham Lane North. County Councillor Clark and myself, as the County Councillor for Weddington, are meeting with the portfolio holder imminently to progress that, and hopefully we'll have some more positive and concrete news before too long. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sackler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I would also like to extend my thanks to yourself and to members of the planning team who actually put a lot of time into this, gave up a lot of their own sort of evenings to sort of be there, make sure all the meetings were actually well attended, and also to councillors who turned up as well. I noticed on this side of the chamber certainly, every councillor sort of attended their own wards, and I think they were there to support and talk through with their residents. I think the combination of actually having officers there and councillors was actually very reassuring for members of the public, and also hopefully it took some of possibly the burden off officers having to deliver everything as well. So I think moving forward, that's something I would certainly like to see again and more. And I think the two complemented each other quite nicely. You know, they both brought something slightly different to the table in regards to the conversations you'd have with residents. Again, the displays did improve. I know there were some issues around the first one at the market, but actually after that, they really improved. And I think residents actually found the visual elements of that really helpful. Talking to a lot of them, they were really sort of pleased that that was there, and they could sort of refer to it and jab their fingers over it and sort of see how it's going to sort of impact directly on them. So a big well done for that. In terms of responses, yeah, we had, what, 88 odd responses. I thought that was a little bit low personally. I would have liked to see more. When I think back to the the initial consultation hearings, we had something like several thousand, just to put it into some sort of context. So these numbers were actually very, very low. And I don't know whether that's because people have got to that stage now where their energy levels are dropping and they're just, it's another consultation. And I would certainly like to sort of see how we can encourage more people to apply. Whether it needs to be rebranded, I have said this before at a prior meeting, whether we need to rebrand it and move away from the old style of consultation, people see it's something that's different, because I think using the old branding, people associate it with the old group that was in power, and we need to sort of show that actually a clean set of heels on this issue. My final comments are regards to the way it's been compiled. It's interesting when you look through the document of how it's all been compiled, that some things, and I know certainly looking at what I submitted, some of it has been condensed down to a sentence from a chunky paragraph, and then yet other people have got entire paragraphs and pages for one comment, and I can't imagine they wrote swathes in the first place. So I would like to know how you've gone about in terms of condensing this, because it kind of reduces some people's comments, including some of my own, to quite an almost frivolous level, where they've just been boiled down to one basic sentence. I don't think that necessarily does it justice when people will look back at these documents and try to use them. So I would like to know how that's actually happened, that some people have got pages, particularly some of the developers, and other people have got just a sentence when they've written far more than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of how we approach responding to comments or summarising comments, there's no hard and fast way. So an officer will review the comment and summarise it. Now, it's meant to be as succinct as possible. Once you get to the examination process, the inspector has the gift to view comments in their entirety if they so wish. Now, if a member of the public or anyone responding to the consultation is not content with how their response has been summarised, obviously we're more than happy to look at that. Certainly what we wouldn't intentionally do is water down someone's response. It is meant to be transparent. So it's purely around trying to pull out what is the key points of a comment. Now, albeit, as you say, they're only 88, it's still 88, and there is quite a lot of detail for officers to work through. So if you get feedback, or you felt your comments were not summarised sufficiently, then by all means feed that back to us, and we can pick that up ahead of it going to cabinet. But effectively, that's how we undertake the process, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Like the others, I would just like to extend my personal thanks to you, the officers that attended numerous meetings, and as somebody who attended several of the consultation meetings myself and responded to the consultation, and also attended the previous plans consultation, I can say that this was so much better put together, better publicised, and clearly better attended by residents. I'd also like to thank you for listening to the public when they asked for a consultation meeting to serve Ash Green and Kersley. And I think that was borne out as a success, judging by the number of people that attended that particular meeting, so many thanks for that. I would also like to say that the form of response that we put online that for people to complete their comments was so much better than last time. You didn't seem to have a degree in planning to be able to complete it. And I'm sure we can improve further in the future when we look at this. So I do look forward to taking this forward now, and I'll wholeheartedly support the recommendation.
Thank you. So if there's no other speakers, I think everyone's spoken on that, haven't So the recommendations are to endorse the consideration of responses. Can I have a show of hands for? Thank you, that's unanimous. On to item 7, the Housing and Economic Land Availability Assessment Methodology. Is you picking that one up, Ashley?
Thank you, Chair. So again, councillors, I'll take the report as written. Now, there's a slight amendment to the recommendations. Recommendation 2.2 should read that the committee delegate the review of responses and any amendments arising from the consultation to the head of planning and building control in consultation with the portfolio holder for regulation and planning. So a slight amendment to that wording, councillors. In terms of the content of this report, I'm not going to go through it in finite detail. It's obviously set out there. There's pertinent points to be aware. This is a key piece of evidence for the council as part of its borough plan review. So the Housing Economic Land Availability Assessment Methodology, the assessment itself will be critical in determining what sites potentially get allocated through our plan review. So it's fundamental that we get this right. The reason we've brought this piece of evidence to the committee is we're seeking to request consultation on the methodology, which is in line with the guidance. And as I'm sure councillors will be aware, when we get to examination in public, we need to demonstrate compliance with the National Planning Policy Framework and guidance. Therefore, it makes perfect sense to be consulting on the methodology. You'll see that this is being done across the wider housing market area, so the methodology should be consistent across that area, and all of the authorities across that area will be consulting on it. But obviously happy to take any questions, councillors.
Thank you, Ashley. Again, we have one speaker, Councillor Condicle.
Thank you, Chair. I have a lot of concerns about this document because a lot of it is based upon viability and people putting sites forwards. And if you put forward a site to build 50 homes, you might say it is or isn't viable, and you don't need much infrastructure. But if you try to dump 500 homes in an area, you then need more school places. And if 10 developers each want to put in 50 homes, then you need as much infrastructure as you did for... So there's lots of things about viability that goes badly wrong. And when a developer wants their site to be in a plan, they say, oh, it's wonderfully viable. And when it comes here in front of us at the planning committee, they say it's not viable unless we drop this, don't pay for that, and don't do this. So I do think we need to have a far higher sort of look at what is actually viable in our borough, not just in terms of physically having a rectangle or triangle of land, but actually it having a positive value after you paid for all the things we need. Because clearly in Stratford-upon-Avon and Warwick, where they're building 1,500 homes a year, things are a lot more viable, and you've got a wedge of money in that land value to pay for stuff. In Nuneaton and Bedworth and Bulkington, and particularly in the areas with the lower land values in Nuneaton and Bedworth, we're really struggling on viability. So I think the whole process needs to have a multi-layered viability thing of, is it viable to build a little bit of housing here, or is it actually viable to build the crazy numbers? And I notice in here, there's on the form, there's a mention of ransom strip, which made me smile because my wife is trying to get some discussion of ransom strips, and we weren't allowed to use that term. It's used on the planning form. So if we're using the word ransom strip here, it needs to also say or land left over after planning or something, so we have common terminology. I say this is really important, and I say the viability is why we cannot build crazy numbers, because it's not just having the squares of land, it's actually having the money left over to pay for infrastructure. And finally, it does need to tie in with the targets. Yeah, if we don't do it right, we end up building on countryside because the brownfield sites aren't viable without funding, and we haven't got the Mayor of the West Midlands to give us funding to do things like they do in the West Midlands. Coventry isn't sending money to us with the new housing. If Coventry was giving us £20,000 for each house that we took off them, then we could actually get those GP surgeries and things built. But that's not happening. So I think the whole thing ties in. I say if you could look at the terminology as well, because people seem to know what ransom strips are. They're those little strips about 1 metre wide. And if we are allowed to use them on these forms, we should carry on using them in other discussions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for your comments. Is there any member would ask a question of what they've just heard? No? No, that's fine, thank you. So the recommendations are that the committee endorses the consultation of the Housing and Economic Land Availability Assessment methodology, and that the committee delegate the review of responses and any amendments arising from the consultation to the Coventry and Warwickshire Planning Officers Group, which the Head of Planning and Building Control attends as Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council representative. I'm happy to propose that. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Beetham. Thank you. Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah, with the amendment as, yeah, sorry, I missed that. So, any member? Councillor Walmsley.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I think it's very important here that we stress that this is not making decisions. This is about consulting. This is about starting a consultation in which we can hear from residents, from interested groups, from interested parties, and that's absolutely vital and key as we go forward. So I think it's just welcome and pertinent to put on record for clarity for some of the council jargon we sometimes get, that this is a consultation, public, other interested bodies and parties, please do come back to us on this, and let's get what people think down, and let's get something finalised that is in the interests of our borough. So it was really just to highlight that point, Chair, that this is not making a decision, but is actually starting a consultation. So hopefully that'll make clear to the public and anybody watching exactly what this moment is about. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Yes, Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a couple of questions. First of all, is there scope for people that may have offered land before to now think twice and withdraw that? Or maybe offer different land, not the stuff, if they own various parcels of land, different land to what they offered before? Can they change things out? I'm thinking of, there's quite a problematic charitable organisation in Bedworth that had originally put land in but might want to think twice about that or whatever. So it would be interesting to know, is this a clean slate? Is it about people putting forward stuff all over again and giving people another opportunity to think about stuff? The second thing I'd like to understand is more about the viability assessments, because unless you kind of know what you're going to build there, it's hard to work out viability. If you want to build a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't really make much money, so very large, there's a 100% social housing project in the edge of my ward, that doesn't make a lot for the developers, and certainly there's not a huge amount of scope to charge extra on that. But if you build aspirational housing, then that's going to raise an awful lot more money, and that you really can charge a lot of Section 106 or SIL or whatever for whatever you can reasonably make a case for. So how do you assess the viability without knowing what's going to go on there? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the first question, the assessment's purely about new submissions. So there's opportunity for any landowner or any interested party to submit anything that they consider that they want to put forward. In terms of the wider elements of your question, i.e. sites that are currently allocated, that would be a separate element of the plan review process. And as part of preparing for a review, we will need to consider the allocations that are not developed to ensure that they're still deliverable. So we'll have to go through that process. In terms of viability, this effectively stems from the guidance. So the viability appraisal that we would hope would be submitted as part of any land submission to us is simply around ensuring that we consider that the site could be viable. So from the landowner's perspective, have they undertaken viability appraisal and can they demonstrate that it can come forward? Clearly we're at plan making stage, so there is a limit to what can be done, and this won't be similar to viability appraisals undertaken at the planning application stage. It's not that sort of finite detail. Now what the authority will need to do is undertake a thorough viability assessment as part of its plan making process. So as we move forward into allocating, potentially allocating sites and looking at the cumulative impact of sites, that viability appraisal will need to be undertaken. That's a separate piece of work in addition to this.
Thank you, Ashley. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions, really. Would I be right in assuming that once the consultation is complete, all of the councils that are involved with this will be adopting it simultaneously? Because clearly we don't want to be in a position where one council adopts the methodology whilst other councils are still raising concerns and putting forward potential changes to it. So would I be right in thinking that all the councils would be adopting simultaneously? I'll let you answer that one if you want. No.
So what we do post-consultation, the comments will go back to the Coventry and Warwickshire Planning Officers Group. Ultimately, as an authority, we will need to make a decision at some point regarding progressing our plans. So if the situation arose where a neighbouring authority within the sub-region had serious concerns regarding the methodology, I can't guarantee that they will then go and accept this methodology. We would then have to make a decision as to, well, do we progress with this methodology in order to continue hitting our milestones? The intention is that we would all accept the methodology, and I would anticipate that any amendments would be minor and not particularly material. And I say that on the basis that the methodology is consistent with other approaches that have been taken elsewhere that have been tested through examination. So I think the risk to us in terms of slowing the process down is minimal.
Thank you. My next comment really concerns viability again. I've read through the methodology and there doesn't seem to be any factoring in of density of population within a council area as part of the methodology. So for example, Nuneaton and Bedworth being the most densely populated part of Warwickshire, that doesn't seem to be factored in into the methodology for bringing forward sites and whether they're viable or not. I mean, is that something that's going to be considered separately?
So, Councillor, what I'm interpreting that to mean is the demand or saturation of a supply. Can you just clarify the meaning of the question? Sorry.
Yeah, of course. What I'm thinking is that with Nuneaton and Bedworth being the most densely populated part of Warwickshire, in the past we were essentially pushed to take housing developments from neighbouring authorities, yet we're very densely populated already, and we know that neighbouring authorities are now calling for sites that are brownfield sites only and don't include additional housing sites, for example. And we don't want to be in a position where the most densely populated part of Warwickshire is the viability of sites isn't taking into account the existing density of population, when other areas have got a lower density of population and would possibly be better placed to take those sites. And I just wonder if we're going to factor this into the methodology from the outset, or if it's going to be an afterthought, a separate consideration at a later stage.
Okay, thanks for the clarification, Councillor. So in terms of the methodology for this assessment, if you view it as a distinct piece of evidence, so we wouldn't, in my professional opinion, you wouldn't include that within this piece of evidence, because effectively what you're trying to ascertain is, can a site come forward? What it doesn't then translate is the council then saying, well, this site will come forward and it will be allocated. So the issue around density and dealing with our own needs and neighbouring needs is a separate matter, and that will have to be picked up through other pieces of evidence as well as the wider process as part of plan making. But it's not part of this piece of evidence.
Councillor Svechkovic.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a couple of points to probably address here. The first one, I obviously sort of remember looking at what went before this with the borough plan over the last few years. And again, I do have some concerns and issues, because one of the things that did come under scrutiny quite a lot and was criticised quite heavily was the methodology that was used in selecting sites. And I would like some sort of assurances, really, that we're not just going to be doing the bare minimum, which is what happened, I think, under the previous administration. And I'll give you an example. A lot of the sites were basically just done by looking at a map, and the decisions were made on whether a site was suitable by looking at an OS map, which to me, I wouldn't do that. I mean, I'm a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, and I wouldn't allow that to sort of happen. As someone who knows my way around maps, that's just not sufficient. My A-level students at who do geography A-level wouldn't do that. So I'd expect sort of like a higher standard from this council when it comes to doing the methodology, and not just look at the maps, but actually to go out and do full site visits as well. I appreciate there are limitations in terms of the amount of people we've got to do that and personnel issues, but where possible, I think that should be something that we do, and we should always try to act to a higher standard and not to the minimum standard. And I say this is something that really came in for a lot of criticism at the stage 1 hearings last time round. I think we've got to be better than that. We owe that to our residents of this borough. So that's my first sort of point. The next one then is obviously on the housing and employment land availability assessment, the HELA, quite accurately named as an acronym. And it's a call for sites. And again, one of the things that was done very badly last time round was a list was not maintained of sites. I couldn't see it in the examination library. It's something that we should have had and we didn't have, and it's something we need to get on top of from day 1 to make sure that we're running and maintaining that call for sites. Other councils, Rugby did a very good job of theirs. They had theirs all kind of written up properly, and we were sort of really a couple of steps behind on this one, and I'd like to see that done properly. So we can see actually what's going into the pot, and then from that you can then start looking at sort of the densities and the numbers. The final thing, which I've got to say, kind of follows on maybe from Councillor Brown slightly, is there will be probably a question at the end of this. It's to do with looking at what our neighbouring authorities, and Councillor Brown sort of talked about looking at what's already happened in terms of planning within the borough. But are we also going to start turning our attention looking at what's just over the boundary of our borough to adjoining boroughs? Because there's going to be housing that's being built, a few hundred metres the other side of our borough line. And are we going to start looking at that and taking that into consideration? Because although it may not come under our borough jurisdiction, it's going to have an impact on our residents. And again, I think we've missed a trick throughout when looking at these sites to see what's already being built, perhaps a mile down the road from us in neighbouring authorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so in terms of the methodology that's in front of you, as I've tried to sort of allude to, don't see it as the decision-making piece of evidence for determining the sites that may potentially be allocated. It's simply there to be part of that puzzle jigsaw, if you like. So it will hopefully tell us or provide us with information as to sites that could be deliverable. There will have to be other pieces of evidence that the authority prepare. So one of those is called the sustainability appraisal, which I'm sure you may be familiar with from previous examinations, and it tends to be sort of that big. But part of that process is assessing your sites against different sustainability objectives. And the way I describe it is you complete that jigsaw, if you like, and then ultimately the council will have to consider all of those different pieces of evidence and determine, well, what direction of growth do we want to go in? And as officers, we'll advise council as to what we consider to be sound for getting through examination, but ultimately the council will then have to sort of make a decision. In terms of the call for sites, more than happy to take on board feedback. Yes, you know, I would want to see that we maintain a register, and we're more than happy to sort of take on board feedback on that front, and we'll go back and have a look at that. Clearly that would be helpful for examination and also transparency purposes. In terms of neighbours, at officer level we sit on the working group and engage on that process. When we receive invites to comment on consultation, we do comment on them, and we have in the past, and we have attended examinations, and we'd be prepared to do that in the future. What I would say is we do have to balance that with the resources that we have. So there is always an element of us having to make a judgment in terms of priorities, but yeah, absolutely. It probably goes as far as us looking at consultation documents in terms of policy consultations. We don't have the capacity to go and look at the evidence base that is being prepared or consulted on. So if members were minded to look at that, that's something we'd have to resource separately.
Thank you. Some good proposals there. Just on one point, a couple of you have raised the point about possible differences between authorities and how they interpret the methodology. And strangely enough, Coventry, although they're not reviewing their plan at the moment, have done a call for sites, but they've only called for brownfield, which beggars belief, really. I think to get an equal playing field, if we're going to talk about housing numbers and land availability, they should at least be doing a comprehensive assessment that includes Greenbelt as well. So if the committee are minded, I think we should be writing to them and requesting that they do a more comprehensive assessment in a call for sites, and equal our efforts in terms of looking at not only brownfield but Greenbelt as well. Councillor Trymond.
Chair, that does sound on the face of it an excellent idea, but if they're not going to be reasonable, if they're just going to limit their consultation, then does that strengthen our hand with insisting that the 4,000 go back?
Absolutely, and those are things we'll come to when the HEDNA comes through in January and we commence those discussions with them. I would rather we had an equal playing field to start, but if they insist on going on brownfield, that, as you say, is a point in our favour, and we shall be pushing that very hard indeed. So if there's no other speakers, the recommendations are as printed with that slight amendment. Can I have a show of hands all in favour?
The letter is an amendment to that as well?
Yes, we'll take that as an additional note on the, yeah. Yes, so show of hands all in favour? Unanimous, thank you. Right, item 8 is the Borough Plan Review Timetable Amendment and Draft Local Development Scheme. I think Adam, you picking this one up? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to update members on the work programme associated with the Borough Plan Review and other development plan documents and to provide an updated timetable. As set out in the report, for the Borough Plan Review, it is proposed that an additional preferred options consultation stage is added instead of proceeding straight to the final publication stage. A preferred options consultation will provide an additional stage of public engagement to shape the final plan, and it will also allow more time for the Council to produce all necessary evidence base in order to ensure the soundness and legal compliance of the Borough Plan Review and examination. If approved, it is intended that the updated timetable will be included within an updated local development scheme. The local development scheme is a statutory document which sets out which development plan documents the Council intends producing over the next 3 years and the timetable associated with their production. As per the recommendations, and if approved, the local development scheme would then be considered by Cabinet. If approved by Cabinet, the local development scheme would then be tabled at full council for approval and adoption. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Adam. Again, we have a speaker on this, Councillor Condicle.
Thank you, Chair. It is truly appalling that this plan might get delayed. It is so useful to have an up-to-date plan and one based upon sensible numbers, not the crazy numbers we had from the previous administration. But the previous administration did actually adopt the timescale for this new plan, that we were actually going to get one by February 2023. And I really am very angry at doing a year's delay. It's mentioned here that it might cost us 150, 200,000 to actually do it quickly in this year's budget. But we'll have to do that work at some point anyway, so it's which years that amount of money goes in. And also one planning appeal can easily cost us £200,000 if it goes against this council. I think delaying this review by a year and doing copious amounts of paperwork and consultation whilst developers put in applications for greenfield sites is a massive mistake. I would like this council to be ambitious. I'd like you to follow through with your very welcome pledge to actually get this done quickly and not backtrack and go slower than the Labour plan. There's also things on here on gypsies and travellers. I think we need to make sure it includes canals. We've got the most canals in the country in the Midlands, and there needs to be a big canal area. So I think the gypsy and travellers needs to include canal pitches, moorings, whatever. And the town centres is a massive source of housing. So the town centre action plan should be not rushed through, but done promptly. And I say, we need a plan. If we wait till 2024 and it then slips to 2025, we will have everything built out, or not built out, but starting to be built out. And I'm pretty fed up of how long this has taken. I've been involved in this process since 2006, when the last plan just started its thing. We had consultation in 2009, for some of the older members may remember. This has been going on an awful long while, and we urgently need to have a fair and reasonable plan with reasonable targets, and I really ask this committee to go and do something other than delay it for a year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Condicle. Just a comment. The plan that's in place at the moment, which none of us, I think, are happy with, took 10 years to develop. When it was adopted in 2019, we were promised by the then Labour Council that they would do an immediate review. 2 years later, we still didn't have an immediate review. Within 2 months of taking office, we had our first consultation. So to say we're dragging our feet is wrong. What we absolutely can't do is deliver a plan that won't be accepted by the inspector. And if we rush it, we've had advice that we will possibly have a plan that can't be accepted. So I take your comments on board, and I don't disagree, but we absolutely must make sure that the next plan, when it's in place, is a good plan, and we're not left with a void. So thank you. Does anyone have any questions on Councillor Condacause? No? Okay, so to move on to debate, the recommendations are that the committee notes the programme of work associated with progressing the Borough Plan review and the other development plan documents, and that the committee endorses the proposed updated timetables for inclusion in an updated local development scheme to be considered by Cabinet. I'm happy to propose that. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Walmsley. Any member? Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just draw members' attention to page 45, 3.2, where it talks about the background and says what the original timelines were. Taking your point very much, Chair, that we were promised an immediate review. In fact, we had to run the arms at the back of the previous incumbents here to get them to finally agree to an immediate review, and they just did nothing for 2 years, and that has put us back. So if we look at page 47, we now start to see the new timelines, but there isn't one specifically shown for the town centre area action plan. Can officers give me a kind of an update on that? And then, if you don't mind, Chair, I'd like to come back on whatever they say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, so at 6.3 of the report, it sets out that officers are still considering the most appropriate way forward for the area action plan. So once we have considered the best way forward, we will bring something back to the committee.
Okay, on that basis, Chair, I'd like to put forward an amendment. If we could change the wording of 2.2, the fourth letter in endorses, if we could change that to notes, I would feel more comfortable, because I need to know exactly what the timeline is if I'm going to endorse it. Otherwise, I'm happy to note what the officers say and look forward to something coming back that I can or endorse or not. But yeah, so it should say that the committee notes the proposed updated timetables rather than endorses. I'd be more comfortable with that, and would like to propose that if there's a seconder.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that proposal? Yes, Councillor Swetley. Would anybody else like to speak to that? No? Sorry, we're just clarifying a point on that. We're concerned if we change that, it may preclude it going to Cabinet. We're just double checking. We wouldn't want to stop it going through the process. As it were.
Chair, if it helps, it doesn't ask us if we're agreeing for it to go. It says it will go to cabinet whether we like it or not. So I don't think it matters what we say there. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Yes, thank you. We'll get some wording on that. Yes, Councillor Walmsley.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to speak more broadly, with your permission, to the sort of the more substantive rather than the technical point from there. Thank you, Chair. I think what is very important in this context is to remember that we came in May, mid-May, because what the public will obviously not necessarily realise is, whilst they might elect on the early May, change of leadership doesn't happen until council appoints a change of leadership, which is mid to late May. And so what we have to be clear is, within 6 weeks, the consultation locations were starting. Let's let that sink in. 6 weeks from formally taking control, i.e. being able to instruct that work be done, for being able to instruct costs be borne upon the council, such as the cost of hire of halls, etc., for a consultation. 6 weeks is all that took. The problem is, for residents of this borough, we had 2 years of inactivity. And I think the problem we have is that whilst there was no leadership, there was very little going on. They checked out long ago. And the big problem you had is that whilst the works weren't carried out immediately, I think the definition of everyone in this room, every politician in this room, of immediate would probably be very different to what was to that perhaps of the Councillor Phillips when he stood up and promised an immediate review. I think the terminology and interpretation of immediate perhaps is somewhat more open to other members than those of us sat here tonight. But we want to see this progress as quickly as possible. That is absolutely true. But we want to see as much public consultation as possible so that the public at home, you that are watching tonight, can have your say properly. And actually that can be considered. What is the point, Chair, of us getting the view of the public if we then don't take or have the time built in to adequately consider what they say? It's ludicrous. I think the public would be far more upset if something were rushed through that didn't take account of their views, that didn't give them adequate opportunity to come back, which is what we're giving with, as I understand, the additional consultation we're putting in now, that didn't give them those opportunities. The public would be far more miffed. And I think what we really must have is that public accountability. Now, had the preparatory background work been done in the 2 years that Labour continued to promise an immediate review of the borough plan, had that work been done, it'd be a very different situation sat here tonight. But the facts of the matter are, that work was not done. That work was not done. No work was done to that effect. And if we want to judge what is going to happen, what has started with literally meetings taking place in 6 weeks of control, through to us getting more consultations coming down the path, I think we've done a very good job to date. No one wants to see slippage, and let's be honest, timetables set by the previous incumbents don't matter one iota. We've already seen the financial black holes they've left because they haven't planned ahead. You know, the idea of planning to them in terms of progression and timescales was done on the back of a fag packet. This is what we have got. This is what is being told is deliverable. This is what's being told gives us more public opportunity and accountability. And this is what we're being told gives us the best chance of having something that is adoptable and sound. Because that's what we have to do. We have to balance between the fact that there are many out there that want no development at all. That's not going to be sound. Let's be straight. You know, there's no point as others have tried to do weaseling around these facts, there has to be some development. There has to be. There's no way around that. But what we have to do is we have to do that in a sustainable way, we have to do that in an economical way, and we have to do that in a way that brings residents with us. And that includes things like the infrastructure that we've spoke of earlier tonight. And I'm glad that my colleague Councillor Tromans in my own ward, to be parochial for a second, is progressing that for us now very well. And that is something that for too long Heim Lane North were telling me there was very little engagement, and I'm very pleased to see him coming in and really getting that upping the ante to deliver a new secondary school for our area. So, Chair, to summarise, what happened before is not the decision of this committee or this council. It was back of a fag packet idea put forward at the last minute by a dying administration, desperate to do what they could to cling on to as many seats as possible to mitigate the loss as possible. And what I think we've seen is that we've got public trust in this side, public trust in this administration, and we are going to deliver a plan that the public can trust. That is the importance of this, and that is what we'll deliver, and I think we should make no apologies for doing that, Chair.
Thank you for that. If I can quickly come back to Councillor Troman's amendment, I think we're happy for that. If there's no dissent on that, I'm quite happy to put that in as an amendment. So we'll change that to from endorses to note. Thank you. Any other member? Councillor Svetkovic.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I was one of those residents who's part of Residents' Action prior to the election, who put that petition together of 6,660 odd signatures, which was presented in this chamber, which led to asking for that immediate review. And as one of those residents, I'm sickened actually to see what then happened to it. And it's interesting that I know the Labour colleagues aren't here tonight, one of them who being obviously Councillor Phillips, who was your predecessor, isn't here to sort of answer some questions, because I'd really love to have a chat with him about this. But I feel that we've been put in a position where they've deliberately poisoned the soil on us. They've decided they'd rather leave us this as their parting gift. And they did have 2 years in which to start the borough plan review, and they didn't. And I say, Councillor Phillips needs a dictionary with the word immediate underlined for him, so he knows actually what that word means, because his definition and mine are very different, and I imagine that of a lot of residents. So they need to take their share of the blame for that. Just to address sort of Councillor Walmsley and what he said, I do for the most part agree with what he's said entirely about the position we've been left in and the speed with which we've moved, and that is to be commended. However, I do have an issue, and the issue is that if we vote for this tonight, we know all the developers will come forward between 2024. As we don't have a moratorium in place to stop them, it's going to be open season on development, and they're going to all be coming forward. And what we'll end up having is we'll end up, closing the door after the, stable doors after the horse has bolted, because there won't be a single development to defend to stop, because they will all have come forward in that time. So although I appreciate the costings of spreading it out over 2 financial years, although I understand the need to engage with the public has always already given us that mandate by voting us in, as far as I'm concerned. That was one of the big things that they voted us in on. It was the borough plan and it was this town centre regeneration. Those were 2 big ticket items they voted us in on. So as far as I'm concerned, we already have that mandate from them. And my residents in Bulkington, I've had lots and lots of messages, lots of phone calls about this issue, saying, without the moratorium, we're all doomed, we're sunk, if this is all going to go ahead. And therefore, I find this very difficult to support for those reasons. I appreciate it's not of our making, this situation. We've inherited this situation. And I say it's interesting to note that, the opposition aren't there, because I'd love to hear what their solution to all of this is and their views. But I'm going to find it very difficult to vote for this tonight, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and just to comment, I stood shoulder to shoulder with you right through that process.
You did absolutely, yeah, Mr. Chair.
And it's very clear that none of us are happy the longer this goes on and we see developments coming forward. But this, I'll make it clear, this is Labour's borough plan. The next iteration of this plan will be ours. We have control over what that looks like. I will not produce an unsound plan. We need evidence to make it sound. The Hedner is a big part of that evidence. It looks like we won't be able to get the Hedner outputs until January, which means we can't have meaningful discussions on housing numbers with Coventry and the surrounding partners till January. So it would make a nonsense of trying to produce a meaningful document without those discussions going forward. So that is one reason that we're needing to push it back. Secondly, we need to be financially prudent. We haven't been left in the best position financially, and a gap of £210,000 to accelerate this is just untenable. We don't have the funds. They have not left us with the leeway to fund that. So to spread it over 2 years is prudent. The public need an inclusion in this process. They need to have their say. They've had their say with the Regulation 18 consultation. The Regulation 19 consultation is literally a consultation where their comments will be parcelled up with the final document and sent to the inspector. They will not have an influence over what that document looks like. Therefore, we're inserting an extra consultation that puts forward issues and options, and the results that come back from that will be included in the final borough plan document that goes to the inspector. So the public will have the true say that we promised them in our election manifesto, and I think that's very important. I don't like pushing this forward any more than any of you do, but as I say, we cannot produce an unsound plan, and advice has been if we carry on with the current trajectory, we are in serious danger of producing an unsound plan, and that just won't do. So I take on board all the frustrations of members, and in some shape and form I agree with you. However, it is what it is, and the timetable has been revised with lots of consideration of all of these issues. Are there any other members wishing to speak? Councillor Beetham.
Hi, thank you for that. I understand that the spend pressure that the council is under is significant, especially with the borough plan, with the amount it will cost to have it sped up here. So I am, however, happy to hear about the extra stage of consultation given to residents to get not only their statutory voices heard, the ones that council need to listen to, but given that optional voice, which so long has been not listened to, which hasn't been asked for. So it's nice to see residents' voices to be actually asked for and will be listened to. I just wanted to ask, in regards to the extra consultation, how you feel that will turn out in regards to what it will look like for the public. What will the public expect from that extra consultation?
Thank you, Councillor. So the additional stage that's being proposed, we've titled it a preferred option. It doesn't have to necessarily be called that. What I would anticipate that it presenting to the public is effectively the direction of travel that the authority intends to go in, say as close to a publication version, a Regulation 19 as possible. So there's a significant amount of work for officers to do between now and that document. But clearly, by adding the additional stage, we want that to be meaningful. So for it to be meaningful, and I suppose referring back to the first item where we were dealing with responses, it's really at the stage where you're identifying level of growth and location of growth where you will get an uptake in responses. So I would be anticipating that that direction of travel is specified in the preferred option, albeit there probably will still be outstanding evidence to be undertaken in between that preferred option stage and your regulation 19 stage. But just to be clear, once you do get to that regulation 19 stage, the only option for the council then, if they receive consultation comments that they want to take account of, if they're significant, i.e. if we start looking at a different direction of travel, you'd have to revert back to another stage. So that is an added benefit of having this additional stage in. It gives the opportunity for the council to reflect upon the responses of the public before moving to that final stage of consultation before your examination in public.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, as I see it, we spent 10 years opposing what was pushed through as a third-rate borough plan. Residents were left behind. The consultation previously was poor. It was difficult for people to take part in the consultation, and the plan did not really take into account the views that were put forward by residents. We've got off to a cracking start with our review. It's a pity that the previous administration's definition of immediate was actually close to glacial, and that for 2 years nothing happened. I just think it would be really remiss of us now to forge ahead and go straight from the stage, the initial consultation, to producing a plan that doesn't involve residents in giving the opportunity to see our preferred options, comment on them, and allow us to reflect on them. Because that would be, again, taking decisions and leaving residents out of the equation. And I think it's very important that we do take residents' views on the preferred options into account. I would like to see this go through as quickly as possible. Sure I would, as other members have noted. But I think that the danger of having a plan that is found by the inspector not to be sound or to have problems, of us have to then go back and do this stage later, will actually add additional costs and even more time to the process before we get to a point where we've got a better plan in place. So as much as it pains me to have to add an extra period of time in to do the job properly, I think it's better, like with a piece of woodwork, that you measure twice and cut once, than actually cutting the wood and getting it wrong and then having to get another piece of wood out and start again. So yeah, I think, you know, this is the best way forward, really. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member? No. Okay, so the recommendation is before you with that slight amendment of one word change, yes? So, show of hands for? Against? Yeah. So that's carried. Right, item 9, any other items? I have no further items for debate. However, I wanted to mention I had a request from Councillor Tromans to add an item to the agenda with regards to policy revisions on housing. And I thought it was relevant to at least mention it to the committee because it will hopefully come back to you at some point in the future. Namely, he raised the point about retaining nomination rights for social rental housing units in the affordable 25% of new developments. He also mentioned changing the mix of affordable housing in favour of owner-occupier and shared equity, and a revision of the property type mix to include more bungalows, single occupancy properties and some aspirational housing. Now, these are all important issues, and any policy changes will be carried out as part of the Borough Plan review. However, before a policy proposal can be put together on this, we need to have a sound, up-to-date evidence base to work with, which will be provided by the HEDNA, the Housing and Economic Development Needs Assessment, which is currently underway. The HEDNA evidence and supporting technical data will provide the information needed to have a meaningful interdepartmental discussion and shape policy proposals that can be presented to this Borough Plan Committee for debate. The final HEDNA documents are not expected to be ready until January, at which point we can push on to look at these important policy issues and prepare proposals to bring before this committee. So hopefully Councillor Tromans will deal with these as early as possible in the new year.
Chair, I'd like to thank you for that. I think the public are very, very keen to see these things, and it's great that we're gathering the evidence to support them. Thank you.
Thank you for raising the issue. So that brings us to the end of proceedings. I'd like to thank you all for coming, and if we can stop the stream.